early morning. For a radio disc jockey, time to start the daily commute to the radio station. Turn left into the bathroom, race down the hall to the transmitter, and pull into the studio. It's right across from the bathroom. In fact, it's right next to the kitchen and bedroom, too.
This is WHRC-FM in Port Henry, New York, broadcasting to New York and Vermont at 92.1 FM.
Welcome to WHRC, the smallest FM commercial radio station in America. It's in a tiny 5-room house measuring 20 by 24 feet, the size of your average 2-car garage. And the staff of announcers, reporters, salesmen, promoters, and engineers comes to a grand total of 2 people. The owners, a husband and wife team of Peter and Carolyn Hahns. All alone, they keep WHRC on the air 106 hours a week.
The biggest problem is basically and definitely a lack of time. Matter of fact, I designed the studio so that you can either sit down or stand up at the microphone, and sometimes, even though I'm kind of pooped, I have to pull the chair out from under me and stand up because I know I probably won't fall asleep on my feet.
WHRC is tucked away in the mountains of Port Henry, New York. Port Henry has no big department stores, no big movie houses, and for some of its 1,400 residents, no hot water yet. For this small-town crowd, the hottest shows in town are the Saturday Night Polka Special, the Agriculture Report, and daily Christian programming, and the easy listening music played every day. It's not New York or L.A., but for Peter and Carolyn, Port Henry is family.
First thing I get up in the morning, I flip the radio on to the Peter station.
Oh, all the time.
What do you think of it?
Oh, it's a great station.
Somebody came and brought us some clothes, and when the station went off the air one day because of a problem with the antenna, and a fellow stopped by and said, "My wife made you some soup. She thought you were sick and couldn't go on that day." Paul Simon and Willie Nelson, Moonlight in Vermont. Speaking of Vermont, at 14 away from noontime at HRC Radio, the Addison County, Vermont Extension Office is...
It's all quite a change for a man who worked at major stations in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Missouri, and a #1 station in Philadelphia. Peter was the Billboard magazine Personality of the Year in 1976. With his career in high gear, he decided to pack it all in to pursue his dream of having his own station, even though the idea of a 2-man station sounded more than a little crazy.
Why did you get into this?
Oh,
What's
wow.
your big reason?
Wish I had a good answer for that. Well, I've been interested in radio for quite a while. I guess it probably goes back to like when I was in 6th grade or something.
We always compare this to having twins. You just get thrown into it, and that's all there is to it.
But the cost of starting a radio station can run into 6 and 7 figures. So to make his dream come true, Peter began collecting the basics at bargain rates. He got a discarded transmitter from one station by U-hauling it himself, and most of his record collection by cleaning out an old bomb shelter where another station stored old records.
Well, because we're not quite as picky here, we'll take Uncle Albert and Admiral Halsey with a scratch in the middle of it or something like that, and then we can use the other songs on that album, too.
92.1 FM radio, WHRC. Hello there, Peter Hahn with you, bringing on Al Stewart and the Year of the Cat from WHRC-FM.
With only 2 people to do the jobs of a dozen, it can get hectic. Peter takes the morning shift starting at 6 a.m., and his show has its own small-town touches.
Well, the weather forecast at 3 minutes after 12, taking a look out the popular weather window, looks pretty nice, especially compared to the past few days when we've had so much rain.
So I said, I've got to come up with something. So I announced that we now have a precipitation continuance indicator, which is the puddle in the front yard near the driveway. And if the drops are hitting that, it's still raining. We have automatic wind indicating units, which are 2 nice blue spruces out in front, and they work every time, and they didn't cost me anything.
In the meantime, Carolyn is busy minding the house and keeping an ear open for any possible help Peter might need, sometimes quickly. She also writes up news and keeps it flowing to Peter. A lot of the news you wouldn't exactly find on 60 Minutes.
A fellow stopped by today and gave me the bowling scores. That's pretty popular. No, really, because they don't know all the bowling scores from everybody, and that is something that people are interested in. Now, that may not have anything to do with Henry Kissinger. If there's something that has really taken place, they already know about it.
HRC-FM radio, WHRC-FM here in Port Henry at 29 away from 2 o'clock. Remember the Guess Who from 71 and Raindance? Here's something rather recent, Michael Jackson and Billie Jean from 92 WHRC.
In the afternoon, Peter hands the station over to Carolyn while he goes into town on a one-man sales and promotions pitch. WHRC's prices are fairly inexpensive.
Hello. Well, it sure is a beautiful afternoon today. Well, we have 10-second commercials for $1.50, and they're pretty popular. We got a power bill the other day that had a daily breakdown. It was $3.57 to run the station per day.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. So if we can sell a couple of commercials, we've made up the power bill.
With 106 hours a week tied up at WHRC, chances of vacation for Peter and Carolyn are slim right now, but both agree they wouldn't have it any other way.
The station has to stay on the air. We keep it on the air. But we like it. We really do.
Well, I sure would like to start another one. I sure would. This is Peter Hahn at WHRC-FM in Port Henry, New York. Thank you for listening today. I sure appreciate you keeping me company when I broadcast.
You ready, Peter? It's 10 o'clock. Better shut everything down. It's time to go to bed.
Hi, and welcome to a brand new program series. This is the first in a series of weekly Adirondack Journal programs. It's something special, and we have you in mind when we're doing the programs. We know you'll enjoy watching. With me today is Joanne Taylor, executive producer of the Adirondack Journal program. Can you tell us the reasoning behind the move from monthly or less frequent Adirondack Journal programs to a weekly series?
Well, we've been doing, as you know, a series of documentaries for the past year, 30-minute documentaries that appeared monthly. And while we were very pleased with the quality and success of the documentaries, there were certain stories, shorter stories, that we were not able to fit into a 30-minute format. And we decided that a 13-week series would probably fill some of those gaps. News feature stories that we hadn't been able to do, and some of the current issues that come up from time to time that we can grab as they come up. So that was the reasoning. We want to fill some gaps in covering the Adirondacks. And I'd like very much to welcome you to Channel 57 as the new host of Adirondack Journal.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
You know, opening the show with you, Peter, this first show also gives me the opportunity to introduce a story about you that's going to allow the people of the Adirondacks to get to know you a little better. Peter and Carolyn Hahn didn't always live in the Adirondacks, but Peter used to vacation here with his family, and he wanted to come back. So he built a radio station in Port Henry. And since then, he's gained a good deal of notoriety. The size of the station and its mom-and-pop nature have attracted a lot of attention. PM Magazine, for instance, did a story on him, and the Associated Press and other trade and feature magazines thought that Peter Hahn was a good story. And we did too. So here's what Peter does when he's not working with us on Adirondack Journal.
WHRC 92 FM with Men at Work from Australia. And it's a mistake. Every time I play that, I think, have I played the correct cut or what? The U.S. and the Soviet Union have come to an agreement that will allow the Russians to purchase 9 to 12 million metric tons of grain per year over the next 5 years. The option is rather open-ended, and that means it would allow the Soviets to purchase more than the 12 million tons if they so desired. The new grain deal is good news for farmers because they have a lot of grain surplus in storage. The index of leading economic indicators came out today. The figures show the June index up 1 full percentage point. The economy has shown steady growth since the beginning of the year. It's going to be a public turkey supper with all the trimmings this Friday, the 29th of July at the United Methodist Church in Crown Point. The dinner will be served family style. It starts at 5 in the evening. Homemade pies available for dessert. It should be quite delicious, and everyone's welcome to attend. You know, the Addison County Field Days will be here before you know it, and once again this year, the Addison County Gospel Choir will be presenting.
Peter Hahn decided he wanted a small radio station of his own, and that's exactly what he got. WHRC-FM is the smallest commercial radio station in the country. Peter and Carolyn live and work in a tiny 20 by 24-foot structure.
Some of my friends, I was working in Rhode Island when I was going to school, and we had kind of a group of compatriots that worked at one of the stations in Rhode Island, and we all discussed where we wanted to be when, and I was always interested in having my own station, and some of my compatriots or colleagues would say, yeah, me too, I want to own WABC in New York, and I thought I would too, but that just is not going to happen. So tried to set my sights in a more realistic goal, and began to realize that in a little town, a small radio station is probably more important to the people of that community than a large station is in a metropolitan area, because there's such a selection from which to choose in the large area. If one goes off, and you know, they'll find another one soon enough. But the radio station in a small community should be a part of the community that is important. And we're trying to build that. It's difficult to just come in and say, hey, we're here, listen to us. You know, it takes a while to build up that trust, and it takes a number of snowy days saying, hey, there's no school today in Port Henry. And then those folks who are happy to hear our station because we said no school, they get a little bit older, and then they have children, and it just kind of, that's how radio stations kind of build a sense of trust, like newspapers. It's a pretty song from Neil Diamond at WHRC-FM, Play Me. 23 minutes after 12, here's a fellow who used to be with the Guess Who from up in Canada, Burton Cummings, and Among the Yesterdays.
Building an audience hasn't been difficult for Peter in the past. He received Billboard magazine's Air Personality of the Year award in 1976 for markets under 1 million. In spite of that, he and Carolyn chose the simpler way of life in the Adirondacks.
My wife and I were originally in the Philadelphia area a few years ago, and I was working at a radio station in Philadelphia, and although I enjoyed it, the traffic was something that kind of was easy to get one down. And even though we were probably about 8 or 10 miles away from the radio station, sometimes with the traffic jams, it would take an hour, 2 hours. I think the record time was 3.5 hours was the longest. So far, because we live in the radio station, the biggest commute problem I ever had was one time the vacuum cleaner was out in front of the bedroom door one morning and I tripped over it. I think that in Philadelphia, I remember one time we lost power at our transmitter site and went off the air, and people were calling up saying, hey, what happened to the station? Why isn't it on? You know, I want to hear it. Just because I think people are more keyed up in a larger area. One time we had a problem here where one of our little parts in the transmitter kind of overheated and said, I'm not going to work anymore today, just shut the transmitter down. We were off for about an hour or so. In that time, some neighbors from down the road tried to tune in. The station wasn't there, and so they came up with some soup that thought I was sick and just had to shut the station off because I wasn't feeling well. Now that is worth $1 million. You know, it really is. That's the kind of thing that really makes this area and a lot of rural areas really worth, you know, it really makes it worth being here.
It's Mr. Warner from EME.
Hello. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Carolyn and I met in college in Rhode Island. And when we were seniors, everybody was talking about what they hoped to do, their vocational interests and career goals and whatnot. And I mentioned that, you know, I really wanted to have a radio station. Well, I imagine that she thought, well, that's great, you know, probably like a little CBS or something like that. And I didn't picture it anything like this either. You know, you tend to visualize things a little bit differently than they turn out. So she's been great in the sense that has been adjusting quite well to the fact that it isn't WCBS or anything like that, but it's rewarding in other ways as well, even though the hours are long.
First thing I have to do is make sure he gets up in the morning on time, which is sometimes a big problem. Then, first responsibility in the day is to bring together about 5 minutes of features and PSA kind of news. What's going on today on this side of the lake, a little bit what's going on in Vermont. And then I try to get a few national headlines, either from monitoring some of the other radio or television stations or whatever in the local papers.
Typical day is the alarm goes off at about 5 o'clock, and I think, wait a minute, how could that be? I just closed my eyes and it was 10 o'clock at night. So I get up probably at about 5:30 or so, and I go into the bathroom to brush my teeth, and then I remember, oh, I forgot to turn on the transmitter. So I go out and turn the transmitter on, and then I listen to the weather broadcast on the National Weather Service radio and transcribe the weather information, and then warm the transmitter up, get the records ready, get most of the public service announcements ready and whatnot, and go on the air about 6 o'clock we sign on. And usually on the air live until about 1 or 1:30, and then at about that time my wife takes over, and she goes on the air, and then I go out and sell some commercials. And I usually come back at about 4:30 or 5, and I go on again until 6. And then at 6 o'clock we have a programming block where we run inspirational programming, Christian programs for a few hours. And then we're back into music until 10 o'clock, so I'm back on the control board again. And then at 10 o'clock it's time to call it a day. So we usually have some paperwork that we have to do, but usually we're sound asleep by about 10:30, if not sooner. And then it starts all over again. WHRC, good afternoon. All right, thank you. Now this is going to be at the Port Henry Presbyterian Church. When will this be? Next Friday night? All right. And it starts at when? 7:30. How's that food going to be? Pretty good? I know it was good last time. We heard some really good reports about the supper that was prepared. Are they going to have the homemade pies for dessert? All right. HMP, that's the abbreviation here for homemade pies for dessert. And what's the charge on that? $2 for adults, $1.50 for senior citizens, and for people under 12. Okay, very good. We'll put that right on the air then. Thank you very much for calling. I appreciate you phoning in the announcements. Thank you. Bye. The story I like to tell is a friend who came up from the Philadelphia area, and he and I worked together at the radio station in Philadelphia, one of the large music stations. And of course, because their revenue is so high, they can afford to hire all kinds of different people. So basically, you did one job and one job only. And when you were finished your shift, which was generally 4 hours as opposed to 16 here, you went home. There was really nothing much to do. You could stop in the kitchen, have a cup of coffee if you wanted, but generally everybody did one job. So he was pretty much used to that format, and he came to visit, and the phone rang, and somebody called me from a church group and said, hey, listen, we're having a supper, and I forgot to tell you, I'm sorry, and if I send it today, you won't get it in time. Can you just put it on, like, after the next record? And I said, sure. And it was a ham and bean supper, and I announced it, and they called back and said, hey, thanks. Well, he heard me do that, and he said, what are you doing with that? And I said, well, I'm going to announce that, and then I'm going to put it on my news. He said, a ham and bean supper on the news? I said, it's news. It's going to happen, and it's in the area. Here's a time check. It's 12 minutes away from 1 o'clock. You know, if you're in the Adirondacks or in the southern Vermont area and you think, gee, the weather is pretty good, and at least a few times a year it'd be kind of fun to get out on the lake or out on a stream or a pond and canoe around, paddle around. If you want to rent a canoe, you can do so. Sometimes when I'm on the air for 16 hours or so, and it's getting to be late afternoon, I think, oh good, only 9 more hours to go. I think, wow, what did I do? Why did I come up here? It usually doesn't take me very long to talk myself back into the fact that because I wanted to come here. And I think that people who come in from the outside find the folks here to be incredibly genuine and very hospitable. And after all, people who do come in from the outside are moving into an area where a lot of the people who have been here for some time have actually been here for generations and generations and generations. And I talked to a fellow who moved into the Adirondacks from Jersey City. And this gave me somewhat of an insight about how people who are here feel about other folks coming in from the outside. Now, it is difficult to adjust. This fellow was from Jersey City, and he moved up to, I guess, near Elizabethtown. And he was here for about a year, and then he discovered from a real estate agent that the lot next to his had just been sold, and it was from somebody from Brooklyn. He says, oh, no, people from Brooklyn moving in. This is terrible. So it doesn't take long to kind of get adjusted and you know, to feel that really claim the area. So I think that that illustrates the fact that the area is so beautiful that once you're here just a little while, you feel like, you know, you've been here for quite some time and it's really your home.